How many of you are LSU undergraduates? Any of you have my geology class last year? Okay, so I can probably tell some of the same jokes that I tell to my 450 freshman geology students. I'm not entirely certain what might be best to talk to you about, so I'm probably going to hit a number of points, maybe more superficially than you would like for me to, but there should be time for questions and answers afterwards. So if you want to back up and question me on something, please don't hesitate to do that. I'm going to talk about a few things, why I decided to go to graduate school. Would I do it again if I could get in a time machine and go back 50 years, 45 years? Strategies for getting into graduate school, strategies for picking the right graduate school. So let me start by talking about the present. I currently have a couple of graduate students working with me. I took one of them to South Africa with me this summer to get her started on her PhD. The woman next to me in this slide is one of my graduate students that graduated about 5 years ago. She also worked with me in South Africa and just had a great experience. I think there's a tendency for faculty to want their best students to become clones of themselves, maybe in the way that parents want their children. If the parents are successful, if they want their children to be successful in a similar way. Kina could have probably gotten a job at almost any university in the country, but LSU has such an incredible culture of having oil companies come and visit. And for Kina, getting a job with an oil company coming from a relatively poor background in New Orleans, she started making, as soon as she graduated, almost as much as I was making at the time after 30 years of working at LSU. So Kina is incredibly successful by almost any measure. And let me say that I think one of the real joys of being a faculty member at a university is sort of living vicariously through your students. So I have about 25 former students that are out with various different jobs. I keep track of most of them were Facebook friends, and so I know that a few months ago Kina had her first child, and so there's that part of it. There's also the part that it turns out that after a few years of having a close relationship with graduate students, teaching them what you know, there suddenly becomes a time, and it's different for each graduate student, but there's a time after a few years where you actually start learning things from your students because they have actually much more time to start specializing in something that you've told them that you thought was interesting, but that you'd never had time yourself to pursue. And so each student sort of in the end becomes your teacher as well as your student. I was a sort of a mediocre high school student. I got into Michigan and Michigan State. I went to Michigan State. But I wasn't a particularly good student. I wasn't eligible to be in the honors college, for example. But after my first year at Michigan State, I really started blooming. I did get into the honors college, and by the time I was a junior at Michigan State. I was being pushed by the faculty that I felt very close to think about graduate school. Before that, it was really just thinking about my imagination about what life would be as a geologist was completely based on, I don't know, a Hollywood or a novelization or something. It wasn't based on reality. But developing a close relationship with a number of faculty really helped me to solidify what I wanted to do in a career, and it involved going to graduate school. I see myself as today having two roles, and these are roles that I've had for most of my career since graduate school. One is that as a scientist scholar, and you can certainly be either a scientist or a scholar. I think it works best if you're both. I think writing about what you do really helps you to better understand what you do. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why people often recommend that you keep a diary or a journal. Because when you write down your experiences, it really helps you to better understand them. When you write about your science, it helps you to better understand your science, and it shares with the rest of the scientific community what you're doing. So scholarship has been very important. I've traveled all over the world to do the kind of geology that I do, taken students to many different places. Last summer, I took a group of students to Iceland. I took a group of students to South Africa. I've done the same thing to volcanoes in Central America, Australia. So again, it's just a life that I never really thought about until I was getting ready to make the choice to go to graduate school. The other critical link, I think, is being a teacher scientist. And again, I link these two because I think it's a very important reciprocal relationship. How many of you have ever tutored somebody or taught a group of people? All right, so I think you know that the first time you try to teach somebody something, you discover the little parts of it that you didn't actually know yourself. And so being a teacher actually helps you to become a better scholar. And being a better scholar helps you to become a better teacher. So these are both of these relationships, teacher, scientist, scientist, scholar, are really very important. And I think that going to graduate school allows you to develop these facets of your life. All right, somebody tell me just very quickly something about this illustration from the New York Times that's on the right. What's the first thing that jumps out? Yeah, so what else about that? Just say a word or a phrase. You don't have to be incredibly articulate here. All right, so let's concentrate on salary. So salary is in the right-hand column, and I think that you can see without plotting this up on a graph that it's a relatively monotonic and increasing function. If you don't make it through high school, your career average salary is going to be in the 20,000s. Each progression in your education incrementally adds to the average salary that you're going to have over your lifetime in current dollars. Finishing up at the very top with professional degrees and doctoral degrees being about 4 times as much as what people with less than a high school diploma have. What's on the left-hand side of this graphic that's interesting? Look at the top there. All right, so there are 2 very interesting things about this from an economic perspective. One is the regular increase in salary that you can expect to have with educational level. The other one is actually even more dramatic, and that is the likelihood that you're going to have a job or that you're not going to have a job. So when this study was done, actually I think it was done in about 2009, if you had less than a high school diploma, you were 14% likely to be unemployed. If you had a professional degree or a doctorate, you were less than 2% likely to be unemployed. The combination of these 2 things, the amount of time that you're unemployed and the difference in salary, lead to an even much greater financial reward for the higher you can go with your education. All right, this is a similar graphic. Now it's just comparing bachelor's degrees to graduate degrees over a number of different disciplines. You can see that engineers have the highest starting salaries for baccalaureate degrees, but even there they have a nearly 1/3 jump in salary with a graduate degree. And that holds for almost all of these disciplines. So in the physical sciences, with a baccalaureate degree, you might earn $60,000 in 2009. It would be $90,000 with a graduate degree. So the other point that I want to make about graduate school is that not only is it a very fulfilling career, but it's a career that's going to be one that allows you to provide yourself and your family with what you need to have a relatively good life. Okay, so how do you choose a graduate school? Well, let me go back to how I chose my graduate school, which is not probably the best model, but I started talking to faculty. I asked them to evaluate my chances of getting into different graduate schools, which schools they thought were really the best ones. I wound up applying to MIT, Caltech, and Berkeley, which were at the time probably the 3 best schools in geology. It never even occurred to me that I wouldn't get into at least one of them. But I did get into MIT, but I was also drafted. I graduated in 1970, right at the height of the Vietnam War, and I was drafted. So I had to defer my entry to MIT. I was a conscientious objector, so I didn't actually get drafted into the Army, but I had to satisfy a 2-year civil work commitment in the national interest. And I worked at a medical library on the Michigan State campus for 2 years as the nighttime librarian in a nursing school. So during this time, I decided I would start taking graduate classes. I got a master's degree in a year and a half, and in 2 years I finished my PhD. And yeah, people don't usually complete graduate degrees this quickly, but I was sort of crazy at the time and just working all of the time. And so my point here, though, is that since a lot of you are LSU students, I know that you're going to think, well, it would be easier for me to just stay at LSU. I think that in a lot of ways that would be a big mistake. I think you want to try to have as many different experiences in your life as possible. Every new experience that you have makes you a better person, even quite honestly when they're negative experiences. So every student that walks into my office, and I regularly have students that come in and talk to me about graduate school, I immediately recommend that they need to consider schools that are different from LSU, and certainly, if at all possible, leave Baton Rouge, leave Louisiana, possibly even consider going to Europe or to Australia, or even South Africa. There are lots of countries where education, especially graduate education, is done in English, and the universities are first rate. So I think the critical questions, and again, you should be writing all of this down. I don't mean this morning, but as you start thinking about these things, and now is the time to start thinking about them, you should be writing these things down and occasionally going back to what you've written down and adding to it. You should be thinking about what your career objectives are, whether you think you might like to teach, do research, work in business or government or for a university. What you think now is very likely going to be different than what you think after you're in graduate school or after you've done postdocs for a few years. But it's critical to start thinking about these things now, because when you talk to faculty for their advice, they're going to ask you these questions, and you're going to impress them if it seems like you've already thought about these things yourself. Where would you like to live for the next 5 years? Where would you like to live for the next 10 or 30 years? For some of you, the answer may be that you really want to come back and live in Louisiana, that you might be willing to go away and get a PhD, but you'd like to come back to Louisiana because all of your family lives here, and perhaps you feel a very strong interest in doing something for Louisiana, for its environment, or for the health of its people. You need to critically evaluate how you've done so far educationally, what your grades were like so far, how well you've done on standardized tests, and then sort of like you probably did when you were applying to undergraduate programs, you should probably make a preliminary list of a half a dozen or so schools, some that you think might be hard for you to get into based on your credentials, some that you think you're almost certainly going to get into. Students still make the mistake of only applying to some very high-level schools, not getting into any of them, and then discovering that they're going to have to take a year off between being undergraduates and graduate students, and that usually doesn't look good in trying to get into a good graduate school, unless you're lucky and can find a job that gives you an experience that makes you competitive. So getting into graduate school usually requires that about halfway through your undergraduate career, you start seriously doing some things. To get into medical school, we usually advise students that at the end of their freshman year, that they should be seriously working on getting into medical school. So the timelines for really developing a successful application package are pretty substantial. Certainly 1 or 2 years at a minimum. It's probably too late to change your major, but it might not be too late to decide that by taking an extra course or two during a summer or intersession or something, that you could perhaps work on a minor that might make your application package a little bit stronger. You might have an opportunity to select a few elective classes that make your application stronger. Certainly what all of you are doing right now is a great thing, not only to build your resume, but to really actually give you some experiences that may help inform some of your decision making. Again, in addition to the research that you're doing, it's absolutely essential that you write about it, even if it's just in your own journal, and that you start developing some understanding of how we illustrate what we do scientifically and technologically. So writing and illustrating science are both very important, and they're things that you should be working on now. You should try to become a better citizen in your department, attending seminars. You know, even when a seminar sounds like it's going to be so far above your head that you're not going to understand anything about it, it's still valuable to attend these things because they give you some sense of the culture of how people interact with one another, how the graduate students interact with the faculty, and so on. And then getting jobs or having volunteer experiences that relate to the career and the graduate program that you're interested in. The summer before you apply, and again for medical school this would be the summer between your sophomore and junior year. For graduate school it would be the summer between your junior and senior year. You really need to start doing some serious writing. You need to draft a several-page statement of purpose, what you want to do with your life, and why you think it is that a particular graduate program, or at least a general type of graduate program, is going to get you to that career goal. You should practice for standardized tests. I know that people often say that it doesn't help to practice for standardized tests. That's simply not true. Now, there are lots of companies that say we guarantee that your GRE score is going to be 10 percentile or 20 percentile higher. There aren't any guarantees, but especially for the mathematics, the quantitative part of the GRE, going through the work sets, which takes about a month or two, is hugely beneficial. Every student that I've ever advised that has done this has significantly improved their GRE scores. And GREs are very important in getting into most graduate programs. You want to start identifying specific programs and even specific faculty members at the school that you're interested in. The programs that you're starting to look at, you need to immediately start discussing these with faculty that you know, and even graduate students that you know, and they'll start giving you what they think are the likely standards for admission into different programs. Almost all good graduate programs have minimum standards, and typically the minimum standards are almost irrelevant. So that in my department, We typically have about 15 positions for new graduate students each year. We have about 150 people that apply for those, all of them well qualified. And the 15 people that get selected are not even necessarily the people with the highest grades and highest GRE scores. They're the people with the best comprehensive package that includes things like a statement of purpose and includes some of the other things that I'm going to mention here. In the sort of early to middle fall before your graduation, you should really have a final list of schools that you have now perhaps met somebody from the faculty of that school in a meeting, or when they've visited your school to give a seminar, that you've talked over with graduate students and faculty. All of your personal materials, your CV, your transcripts, perhaps the scores that you've obtained on practice GRE tests, you should share these with your mentors. And I know you may feel a little concern about privacy, but I think that you really do need to share these materials, because these people are going to give you a frank assessment of what they think your chances are of getting into various programs. You usually need 3 recommendation letters. It's probably time right now for you to be cultivating a relationship with 3 people, 3 professional people that are going to write you good letters of recommendation. People that you've taken classes from, people that you've worked for professionally, are really the people whose letters are going to be meaningful. A letter from your pastor, or a letter from the chief of police saying that you've never been arrested, these are things that aren't going to help. Getting good, strong letters from people that really seem to know you are essential. You want to provide your references with a copy of your current CV, your personal statement, and really even a copy of your transcript. And then in the middle of that fall, you also need to take the GRE for hopefully the first and last time. Although if you, for some reason, bomb it, there's still an opportunity to study for a few months and then take it when perhaps you're at a better place mentally or emotionally. So the timelines for applying to graduate schools are all over the place, but most graduate schools only accept applications for the fall semester every year. And that's because most academic departments have budgets that run on the academic year rather than the calendar year. So they commit all their resources at the beginning of the academic year. So if you wanted to go to Stanford in geology, you would need to have completed everything and applied to them not on December the 11th, but before December the 11th. If you wanted to come to LSU to study geology, everything would have to be in January the 1st. If you wanted to go to UCLA, it would be January the 15th. Auburn, which is not as competitive a program, is February the 1st. Nicholls State really doesn't have a geology program, so I picked on biology. Their deadline for admission is March the 16th. So yes, if you go to the front web page for almost any school, they'll give you some kind of deadline for admission to graduate school, and it's usually literally only admission. And the critical deadline is actually the deadline that includes an application for admission and support. Now, Some of you may be independently wealthy and you're thinking, well, I don't need support. My father, the US Senator from Minnesota, is going to send me wherever I want to go. Well, it turns out that this wouldn't help if you wanted to go to Stanford, because Stanford only admits students that they give support to. The same thing applies to LSU, UCLA, and I don't know about these other two schools. Most graduate programs fully support their graduate students, because the graduate students are not only learning, but they're working in the department. Even if you have a fellowship, you're still working in the department. And so most good graduate programs expect that they can support their graduate students so that they can commit all of their time to taking classes, to working in the lab, to doing the various things that are important for a graduate career. Most applications are electronic nowadays. If possible, you should download the electronic form, or at least look at it, know what the questions are, and actually complete the answers to questions before you electronically fill out the application. You might even want to have somebody look at your answers for you and perhaps suggest some grammar changes or some factual material that might be more important. You need to have your transcripts ready to be sent officially, however that's done at the school that you go to. If you can, wait until your fall semester grades are posted on your transcript. That will save you from having to send a second set of transcripts after fall grades are posted. Check with your referees to make sure that they understand what the deadlines are for the different schools that you're applying to. Different schools may have different formats for letters. Some schools require that the referees log on and fill the form out online. So make sure that you do this homework so that you can let your referees know what's expected of them if you're applying to Stanford and UCLA and LSU. In spite of those deadlines, December the 11th, January the 1st, January the 15th, don't wait until the last day. Because some programs are very hard about deadlines. And if you know, somebody drops a sack of mail on the floor someplace and it takes them an extra day to sort through the mail, you may be out of luck. So don't wait until the US Postal Service says that, yes, they can get it there in 2 days. Send it in a week in advance. Well, you're still not done. So after you've applied, there's still a lot of work to do. And I can't emphasize this enough. And in fact, getting into the school that you really want to get into almost starts now after you've applied. So hopefully you're at a school that has enough faculty that somebody on the faculty actually went to school at the school that you've applied to. Or at least they have some friends that are now on the faculty there. And so within a few weeks of applying, it's not a bad idea for you to either call or email the graduate program director, or better yet, have your mentor do this to find out what the process is that current year for selecting students. At about the same time, again within a few weeks or no later than a month after applying, you should call or email or have your mentor call or email and find out whether you can visit their department. This is the kind of initiative that often works well to suggest that you're someone that uh, is very interested in the program. File your income tax. For some graduate programs, even though they give you a very nice living stipend, pay all of your tuition and fees and health insurance, you may still feel the need to get a student loan to help with graduate school. You need to file your income tax and claim yourself as an independent person in order to qualify directly for a student loan yourself. And finally, be persistent. One of my more recent students that I helped through this process applied to Stanford, Berkeley, Hawaii, and Oregon because she wanted to work on modern volcanoes. And she hadn't heard anything for a while from several of these schools. And so I knew people at all of these schools, and I started calling. And one of these schools told me that they weren't considering her because she hadn't called yet to express interest in the program. Even though she had applied to the program, she hadn't called yet. So it is very important to be persistent. If you really, really want to go to UC Berkeley, because there's a great person there working on the genetics of the transmission of some kind of disease or something, be persistent. The worst thing that's going to happen is that they're going to quickly give you a no. They're going to say they had 300 applications for 2 positions, and that's not unreasonable. Very popular, nationally very popular faculty have an incredible number of applications for what is typically an entering class of just a few students. So you might think, well, it's better for me to apply to a good school and not say which faculty member I want to work with. Well, that strategy doesn't work either, because graduate schools are looking for students that are focused on some fairly specific area of research where there might only be a handful of faculty at the most in a very large department, and perhaps only one faculty member in a small department working in that area. Now, sometimes graduate schools will come back to you and say, we're willing to admit you, but the only support that we have is to be a research associate with a faculty member that's doing something slightly different. And then you just have to decide, do I want to work on genetics, or am I going to be okay working on some other area of molecular biology or biochemistry? So all of these things take place in this post-application period. It's almost like negotiating a contract to be a professional baseball player or something. You're going to contact them. They may give you a slightly different offer than what you were hoping for. There'll be several other schools in the equation. Again, most people pay for graduate school with money that they earn as a graduate teaching assistant, a graduate research assistant, or as a graduate fellow. So almost 90% of students that are working on PhD programs are supported by the programs that they're working in. Aid packages usually include enough to live on. Now, you're not going to live in the style that perhaps you're hoping to live on, and so for that, you might need to get a loan. But aid packages are usually enough for you to get by on. In spite of fairly substantial aid packages, about 1/3 of students take out loans in graduate school. So again, you should start looking into how you can get a student loan and whether it's better to do one while you still are a dependent of your parents, or whether you want to be independent. And again, you need to think about how you're going to file your income tax for your senior year in college to qualify for different types of loans. Some employers provide educational benefits. The biggest employer that does this is the U.S. military. Become a state resident as soon as you can. So if you accept an assistantship in California, as soon as you move to California, you should change your residence to California. Now, I don't know what the rules are in California. I do know what the rules are here in Louisiana. If you come to Louisiana with a teaching assistantship, you are given a waiver of out-of-state tuition, which right now is about $15,000 a year. If you won some prestigious fellowship that paid more than your assistantship, you would lose your out-of-state tuition waiver, and suddenly you would owe Louisiana State University $15,000 a year. Or if for some reason you lose your assistantship because you've had it for 5 years and the department only gives you 5 years of support, if you're a resident of the state, you're going to pay the low level of tuition for state tuition, and almost all universities have a huge difference in tuition between in-state and out-of-state students. At some of the bigger public universities, out-of-state tuition can be $40,000 or $50,000 a year. It's comparable to Ivy League type tuition. One thing that I meant to put in here, and I forgot, and I think this really applies to some of you because I think clearly you're some of the better students from the schools that you attend. For STEM students, and I think you're all STEM students of one flavor or another, there are a number of national programs that test students in the fall of their senior year for very competitive, very prestigious, and financially very lucrative fellowships. The National Science Foundation gave 8 of our LSU seniors last year $100,000 plus national fellowships. The thing that's nice about these national fellowships is that they also include a full cost of education. So that $100,000 is money that's going into your pocket, and you don't pay tuition or fees. And you can take that scholarship with you any place you want to go. So if you win one of these National Science Foundation fellowships, it's basically your ticket to go any place that you want to go to graduate school. Other programs, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, have similar programs. All of these are things that you should look into in the fall of your senior year. Okay, that's probably a good place for me to stop since I don't have any more slides. I'd be happy to answer questions or not.
What are some factors that determine how long you spend in graduate school?
Sorry, repeat that, please.
Some factors that determine how long you spend in graduate school.
Oh, that's a tricky question. So, like I said, I finished my PhD in 2 years. I did so because I discovered that my PhD advisor was getting ready to leave Michigan State. And so I just quickly finished writing up what I was working on, and he was agreeable to let me finish, even though it was scandalous that I would only spend 2 years on my PhD. But I've known other people that have only spent 2 years or 3 years on a PhD, or maybe 4 years if they didn't have a master's degree. Some of it is a function of discipline. In some disciplines, it's just assumed that you're going to work 6 years. And so the pace of the program is designed for 6 years. You're guaranteed 6 years of support. You're expected to do some kind of major qualifying exam at the end of your second year. At the end of your fourth year, you should defend your research proposal and have written maybe your first publication. A lot of it depends on the working relationship that you have with your major professor. And I can't stress enough that that's very important. The person that you decide to work with in graduate school is going to be like somebody that you're getting married to. And for many marriages, they probably last less long than the relationship that you may have with your PhD advisor.
I had a question. Do you have any advice for students looking at a December graduation?
Yeah, December graduation is tough. Where are you going to school? Would you have support if you stayed into the spring and graduated in the spring? I know some schools don't like students that have already claimed that they're going to graduate to decide to put it off. I think it's important that you figure out something that's going to look good on your statement of purpose and your CV. Even if that means volunteering and taking out another loan, ideally you would work somehow, but working selling shoes in the local mall is not going to impress the people that are looking at your credentials. And they'll understand that maybe you actually graduated a semester early or something, and they're not going to hold it against you. But it's going to work better if that 3 or 4 months that you would have otherwise been going to school has something that looks professionally sound. And again, it may be that one of the faculty members in your department will hire you as a transient worker, which sounds terrible, but that's just the term that is used for non-student workers that work in the lab. Even if you're only getting paid to work in the lab 10 or 15 hours a week, it would probably be enough to help pay for your rent or something, and it would be another professional experience that would look good on your resume. The standard answer for that for applying to medical school is that you need to convince the medical school admissions faculty that you're capable of working about 80 hours a week. And so they expect you to not only carry a high class load, but also to be involved in lots of extracurricular activities, volunteer work, and do research in somebody's laboratory, and shadow a doctor. Medical school is incredibly arduous. And so they're looking for evidence that somebody can literally work 80 hours a week and not have a nervous breakdown. I'm absolutely serious. I spent 7 years as the associate dean in the College of Science, and I met with the deans of the medical schools twice a year for those 7 years, and that is exactly what they're looking for. In fact, they will pick people that have lower grades and lower test scores if they seem to have performed at this sort of 80 hours a week. And 80 hours is sort of a number I'm making up, but it's not far from it. And that is actually the expectation in medical school, that you're going to have to work those kinds of hours to keep up with the workload. No, I think in graduate school, it's probably more important to have a greater variety of experiences. And so working in somebody's laboratory for perhaps longer hours, even if you're not getting credit for it, and especially if you get to go to some national meetings and make presentations and perhaps even have a paper published. I had 2 or 3 papers published by the time that I graduated as an undergraduate. So I was spending a lot of time working with 3 different faculty members. So, I mean, it's great to develop a relationship with one faculty member for 2 or 3 years. Frankly, it would even be better if perhaps there were several different faculty members in somewhat different areas. Perhaps one that was more computationally oriented, another one that was more analytically oriented. Yeah, and that's a number I just pulled out of my hat. But I think at least when you're initially evaluating schools, you should have a larger number. Because as soon as you start sharing this with the faculty that you trust, they're probably going to cut some of those schools out. They're going to say, for what you're interested in, this school just isn't good. Or they're going to say, well, based on your grades, it's probably going to be very hard for you to get into this school. You might still leave it on your list, but it's going to be a long shot. Now, it costs $50 or $100, or even several $100s, depending on which school you apply to. So when I say apply to 6 to 10 schools, I would suggest that you be ready to apply to 6 to 10 schools, but you certainly need to apply to more than a few schools. Because, again, for specialized programs, even in schools that ordinarily you would have an easy time getting into, some years they admit very few people. Other years they just happen to have a large number of assistantships available. And so the numbers of students that are admitted into a particular department every year vary by as much as a factor of 2. So some years geology only admits 7 or 8 new PhD students. Other years it's up to 20. So you don't want to pick on a school where you're almost certain, because you've known 2 other people that had poorer grades than you had and poorer test scores. Don't let that be what gives you the idea that you're going to get into a certain school, because the statistics of small numbers are very dangerous. Both. Yeah. Ideally, what's going to happen is because you're having these research experiences now, you're going to be able to go to some national meetings, possibly present your work, or at least go to the national meeting and your name is on a poster and you can hang out at the poster, and faculty are going to come by. Faculty work these student poster things like baseball scouts looking for new talent. Literally, this is what happens. And you'd be surprised how many people you will meet this way. Most major conventions also have a large hall where graduate schools have set up booths, and there are faculty members that are there all the time to talk to. You should talk to people like that informally. As you're getting close to applying, you should probably talk to anybody that you've already met or anybody that you've been introduced to, even electronically by your mentor. The more dialogue, the better, both before, during, and after the application process.
Other questions? Any questions from our other sites?
Okay, I realized that I was hiding over in the corner so that people couldn't. Oh, okay.
Well, join me in thanking Dr. Byerly.